Bool this time, lead the question.
Thank you, Chair, and good to see you, Mark. You are Anglian Water is the largest water company in England and Wales by geographical area. But in that then context, you've had, and as Andrew has mentioned before, you've had to return 38.1 million to customers this year through lower bills due to falling behind on targets. The Anglian Water is the third worst performer with 40.16 incidents per 10,000 kilometres of sewers. It's responsible for 11 serious pollution incidents. It has the most non-compliant treatment works in the whole sector at 13 and has been convicted of 105 environmental offences since the 1990s. And that also means a fine of £500,000 in January 2023 for the discharge of 6 million litres of sewage into the River Great Ouse in May 2017, which is in my constituency. Is it only understandable that customer satisfaction is decreasing?
Interestingly, our customer score is going up in the last 2 quarters, which in light of the facts you've just showed me would seem counterintuitive. So actually, customers are getting more satisfied with our work. I could relate to some of the specific stats because we've made some big improvements over the last 6 months. But I think if you stand back and take all of what you've said in the round, it just proves I've got a job to do. And, come back to the other question, the fundamentals of Anglia are very sound, but there is work to do to drive performance. And the point around sort of pollutions and some of the other issues you refer to are the things that are defining us at the moment. And that's why part of why I took the role is because there is a big investment in Anglian in the next 10, 15 years, and we've got a lot of work to do to invest in our asset base, increase our asset health, expand the capacity of our system. We've got reservoirs and pipelines to build, huge investment in our water recycling infrastructure. So it just points to the fact that, yes, performance has not been where it needs to be, and that needs to change, and it needs to improve, and that's part of what I've been setting about in the last 6-7 months.
But I think the Environment Agency, and as you said, that sounds very positive about the future, but the Environment Agency has expressed concerns that Anglian Water cannot and will not ever change in terms of its pollution. And with the greatest respect, in my constituency, HS2 South Northamptonshire, has had a huge impact and it has scarred the constituency. And I think your involvement perhaps with that will strike fear into their hearts as to whether actually you will be able to deliver on the changes that you're promising. So what will you do to instill confidence that under your leadership we will actually see this change?
Well, on the point of the agency, we've got a very good relationship with the Environment Agency, and both locally and sort of what we call corporately, we are well aware that at an EPA 2-star company we've got work to do. And as I've already said, I think we can see a trajectory going into AMP8 where we would start to improve that position. In terms of sort of confidence, I mean, part of why I got this job, part of why I wanted this job was to bring some of my experience in infrastructure projects. We've learned to some extent actually in Anglian through the strategic pipeline project where for probably the first time in the company's history our work is very much in the public domain. Often a lot of work that water companies done is sort of behind the fence of our own facilities and customers don't necessarily see that work. And so us being much more diligent, much more engage with local stakeholders so people understand when we're going to be doing the work. With a huge amount of consultation, for example, going on at the moment around the 2 reservoirs that we have to build in the next 10, 15 years. So that's part of really what I hope to bring to the organisation. Anglian's historically had a good reputation around project delivery, but at a relatively modest scale. I mean, the conversations we're having in turn is that we are moving really from being a water company to an infrastructure company. We've got much different challenges actually. And to your question, us really dialing up our engagement with local authorities, the agencies, the NGOs, our customers, so they understand why we're doing the work we're doing, when we're doing it. It will inevitably be disruptive to your experience of building a railway through your constituency. And again, that's the challenge. And I think there's huge opportunity for the region with all that investment, but we've got to tread carefully because our licence to operate as a business is only as good as the way we take our customers with us and those stakeholders that are impacted by our work. And I think my experience is if people feel like that's done to them rather than done with them, then that's when you start to sort of lose that reputational bank balance. So it's that's the job of the next few years.
What will you actually do in that regard? Because actually, as I said, with HS2, there is a particular village, Greatworth, in my constituency, who is both having road closures from HS2, but then also Anglian Water are coming in and closing at the same time, and they're not actually consulting. And so actually my village, particularly that village, are being locked in. So, because you talked about, we need to have that greater transparency, but what are you actually going to be putting in place, or have, because you've been enrolled for a few months now?
Yeah, we certainly need to work with local authorities. Organisations like Anglian or HS2 for that matter, we can't just go and close roads without getting local authority consultation. I think we've got to work as Anglian much better with the local authorities to make sure there's a coordinated approach to things like road traffic management and the sort of things that we'll need to do. We've done a lot of engagement around the region with landowners, particularly for the pipeline project. And I think there's been a lot of learning in the organisation as to what that means. I think I've done 3 regional events with different along the line of route of the Spa pipeline for that very reason, because we've realised that we need to be open. The project got off to a poor start due to sort of COVID and weather and other things. We've got a really solid plan for that programme going forward now. And again, we can be much more certain to people about when we're likely to be in their constituency, when we're likely to create that disruption. Because my experience is people can accept it if it's predictable. It's when it becomes unpredictable, it's where you really start to then sort of lose the battle.
And then just back onto pollution, it has been reported that actually there were thousands of pollution tests that were passed at sewage points but actually were never carried out. So do you have a transparency problem? Because it seems like with your quite opaque structure, but yet equally with some of these results, what's going on there?
I'm not sure what you're referring to. I don't recognise the transparency problem in that regard. I mean, I don't know how much if the committee have been sort of briefed on, I mean, again, an education for me on the sampling programme. So, and if the committee wants to come to our labs in Huntington, I would happily host you. In our labs, we take something like, we do 3.5 million tests a year. We take 275,000 samples a year. So every day, 750 samples are taken, and we run 10,000 tests a day on all of the water going into our supply system and all the effluent that would go back into the natural environment. And that is all regulated by the DWI or through the EA. So it's really, one of the sort of early observations for me coming in is what goes on behind the scenes to make sure that we provide safe drinking water into the system, and that actually we make sure that we test any effluent that goes back into the natural environment. So I don't recognise the statement around transparency there. All that is audited by the agencies, and again, we'd be happy to share some of that with the committee.
Yes, thank you. I think we've been given various bits of information on this at certain points. And for example, it has been reported that Anglian saw the highest rise in the hours of raw sewage pumped into rivers than any water company, because it was a 205% increase, and that was of 273,163 hours. And often it's common that people blame sort of wet weather, but actually 17% of those overflows were estimated using EA data still in development to have happened for reasons other than high rainfall. So I think what we're just wanting, there's a lot of information and you've got a lot of facts, and perhaps perhaps we should have more data sharing, but it's not a very positive picture from what we're seeing.
Well, I agree that our pollution's position is not a positive story. We've had some, again, before I arrived, a couple of very bad winters when it comes to rainfall, so unprecedented numbers, and certainly the investment programme for AMP8 and beyond is, in our consultation with customers, our customer feedback is they'd rather see us put much more resilience into our system to deal with hydraulic overloading, which is the sort of technical term for having too much flow in the system. I think the other issue that Anglian suffers is 28% of the land in Anglian is below sea level, so we're very prone to flooding. It's very flat. We don't have the benefit of gravity to move water or sewage around the network, so we have a huge amount of pumps. Many of those pumps are life expired. There is a real issue about asset health of our pumping system. And of course, the other issue with Anglian, we've seen a huge amount of contingency, a huge amount of growth. Cambridge, Peterborough, Milton Keynes, Colchester, Northampton, huge amount of development in and around the region. We're not a statutory consultee in development. Developers have a right to connect. We exercise our voice, we work closely with local authorities, but it's an issue for us in making sure that we continue to invest in our asset base to cope with the growth of the region. So a whole series of factors, both some of our own making and some of those external, are sort of playing into the sort of performance you refer to.
Just lastly on customer satisfaction, you mentioned that it's been going up in the last couple of quarters, and I appreciate you're new to your role, but the long-term trend hasn't been particularly good for Anglian's customer satisfaction. You have been rising up the ranks in recent years, but only because the scores of other companies have been falling faster. So your score is fact.
We're not as bad as the others, is that what you're saying?
Well, that is the reality.
I'm not sure I'll take comfort from that, really. But
the score dropped from 83 in 2020-21 to 77.5 in 23-24. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, a range of reasons. I mean, we've touched on some. I think the pollution's performance has been a factor. The case that you referred to as a case in point. So we've got work to do. We've got work to do. Again, come back to the culture of the business. Our purpose is enshrined in our articles. We actually do care deeply for this, but we've got more work to do. And again, that's the job for the next months and years ahead, because our customers give us our licence, frankly. There's a sort of official licence question about the licence as a company, but actually it's the customers that you judge. And we've got work to do.